Okay, so here, so if I'm using the stamp tool from like an angle, the clone tool. Sorry, I say the stamp tool because it's I remember the Photoshop one. And I try to like work. It's not gonna work. See, it's like it's actually angled, so it's. I forgot that this operates like that. You have to kind of get in front of the object, so like face it, and that way you can pressing Control like here and moving. It's still a little off. You have to kind of figure out, especially with a grid, it's a little difficult. But when it comes to like texturing like a skin or like, it's easy. It's just we're not like lined up perfectly here. So we have to be kind of facing the objects. You know, I'm gonna go in. It's a little off. So these things can be kind of a problem. So the closer the better. And there's this other tool that I like to use, which is the burn and the dodge tool. I mean, you guys know what they are from Photoshop. It's either burning an area, like darkening an area, or lightening up an area. So that would be kind of a nice way to experiment. So let's say you wanted to add more burning here. You can actually go and use the burn tool, and that I would just make it less strong. Like I'm gonna make it strong, less strong, and then I'm using a stamp image as well. And if I start clicking, I can start like kind of creating this area. I'm starting to like darkening an area. Now if you press Control, you do the opposite. You're lightening up areas. See, now I'm like adding more light. Adding more light on this, and then I can let go of the Control key and like add more dark area here. So overall, you can see that I can go to the corners here, add like a little bit more. Hold on the Control. So if you hold up the Control, it switches to the dodge tool, which is adding more light. So those are the two. Those are nice for this kind of effect. And then there's the. Let's try that one more time. Let's try to use the stamp tool, the clone tool. So one other tool that I didn't mention is the shift. If you press the shift while you paint, it will blur the paint. It will actually, it's like water, so it blurs things. So I can blur. So now I'm like blurring and kind of combining things together. So that's another tool. The sponge tool, it's almost like desaturates areas. And with the Control again, it actually saturates more. So if I just, so now I'm using the sponge tool. So I saturate it. You can desaturate or saturate with the Control key. You do the opposite effect. So that's the contrast tool. It's like brightness and contrast, like you use in Photoshop. This is very intense. Those tools tend to be really strong, so you have to take the strength down. So then you have like, you add brightness, or Control, you add like, so now the Control does the opposite, so it kind of takes away the brightness. So with this you add a lot of contrast and brightness, but on the opposite side it's starting to make the image more flat. So you kind of take the contrast away. So with the control key, I'll take some contrast away from this area if I wanted to. Of course, I can really and see it makes it more flat, so less bright. But if I let go of the control key, I'm gonna make it it makes it really bright. So if you don't want it that bright, you can go like really low. I would go like really low and add. Those tend to be very intense on the model. So that's the contrast. We talked about the burn, the dodge. The blur tool is like it blurs out. It's the shift key. If you don't want to use, you don't have to grab the blur tool. Anytime you want to blur the boundaries of paint and kind of like mix the paint together, you use the shift key. Now the blur tool, you have to go to the blur tool to tell it how much intense you need it to be. So let's say I want it to be less intense, like 10. Then whenever I use like the blur tool, let's say I'm using the pencil tool, and then I want the blur tool, I'm going to hold in the shift key, and it's a little bit less intense. Notice that it's not as intense as before. I can even make it less, so I can actually restrict it to like 5. And that's what I usually do. I make the blur tool also really low, so I can actually, if you go down here at, let's say I'm going to go to this area, and you know, I'm using the pressure of the brush, so it's like I'm like barely touching the surface here, and I'm like blurring this area. So the blur tool is really cool too. So the dry brush tool, I cannot use it right now because it needs texture, 3D texture. So the clone tool, you know, the paint eraser, you know, the pencil is very like straightforward. Also the pencil tool, just notice that if you want to use the pencil tool, you can do something like a steady stroke, which is down here, and it's usually off. Steady stroke, I showed you that before, is like if you want to do a straight line, you can actually start from here and see how like you get to pull that instead of like painting right away like that. You get to actually you have four units of distance. You start and you start pulling this. See this like little thing? You start to pull it, so you can actually do really intricate curves. You can kind of take your time and move around and like, you know, and make like nice intricate curves or straight lines. So you can make a straight line, which is much easier, like because you're actually pulling a string. So now you have like a straight line. So that's the steady stroke. That's for everything. Every brush tool has a steady stroke, not the projection tool. Everything else. So let's go back to the airbrush now. And I'm going to use the airbrush not with a steady stroke, with some like, I'm going to go and take a color from like palette here. And the airbrush, you know what it is, you know how to use it. It's just a very nice, it's my favorite tool. It's really, and if you wanted to make it more of a spray paint, like you can actually go and bring this. Let's say this one, let's say a spray paint. You get a stencil, and let's make this. I mean, the spray paint might be better with the brush tool, but even the so you can see now you get that texture of a spray graffiti kind of. I'm gonna write some Greek thing. It's a Greek football team that has a very violent how do you call them? Hooligans. I don't know. They just destroy the stadium every time they. Anyways, so there's like, it's only fire and smoke. You just sit on a chair, and then there's like all these like flares, and they're on your eyes, and your eyes are burning, and you think you're in a military camp, that there's some sort of like massive training going on, but no, it's actually people that are watching soccer and they're destroying the chairs and throwing them down on the stadium, and you have to cover your head so you don't get killed. And that's the name of the team, called PAOK. So basically I sprayed painted that here, and like I'm a fan. So that's the airbrush. So we talked about paintbrush, projection, eyedropper, you know, it's the eyedropper tool, airbrush, pencil, paint, eraser, clone. The dry brush I'm going to show you in a minute, blur, dodge, and then blur again, remember, with the shift key. Contrast, the sponge is great. Hue and hue shift, I don't use them much. I don't know how to explain. These just change the hue of your texture, so it actually you have to be like a colorist to understand the hue. I mean, I'm not really proficient with this, but so you can actually kind of like, it actually takes and shifts the hues of your actual color information of the texture on it. So yeah, I can't really give you much. And the invert tool just inverts, does the opposite, so inverts the material, which is kind of cool too. So you can actually go and say, I'm going to make this invert here. So now, that's all for painting with all these tools, minus the dry brush. These are all the tools that you need to know. That's what we have down here, and then the stencil brushes. Now, if you want to, now what all this work I did with the, let me just delete this one, I don't need it anymore. All this work I did with the dirt layer was, the reason was to just overexpose it on this layer. So I need to bring this layer on the top. So I'm going to bring this guy up here, and here we go. I have the dirt layer, and it's there, and I can go and open it, go to the mask, and make sure that the mask has, I'm going to use the paintbrush. I'm going to use okay, I'm going to use this one now, this stamp image, and I'm using a white paint. So actually I'm going to start revealing, you know. And now I can actually go slowly and start revealing that dirt around the cracks here. So you can have multiple dirt masks. You can have multiple dirt masks. So like now I have like this one over here, and I can actually accentuate areas around this. You can paint like Photoshop. You can make something really high and very realistic. Now, if you, let's say you wanted to use that exact texture for bump map, I'm going to show you how we do it later. So I'm going to stop here and pause the video, turn off the video, and then on the next video I'm going to show you how we can take that to Substance.